Hi everybody, how's it going? Welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers on them, not with the intent to tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential option for playing a character, with the hopes of creating something that is both really powerful but also really fun to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the game itself, then welcome home. This is where you belong. I'm so glad that you're here. So thank you for being here. My name's Colby. Really quick before we get started, if you would be interested in having a step-by-step guide to recreate the character that I build each week, I would appreciate it if you would consider joining the channel as a member. There should be a little button down there if you're watching on a laptop or desktop. On mobile, I think you have to go into my profile to see that button. But anyway, $2 a month gets you access to my library of write-ups that I create for each episode so that you can recreate the character with a little cheat sheet, basically. Mostly, I think for most of my supporters, it's just a way to support the channel and help me create more and better content. So big thanks to my supporters. Thank you for considering supporting, and even if you're not considering, thanks for being here anyway. Just watching and liking and subscribing and commenting are all also great ways to support the channel. As of this recording, I just got back from Boston and PAX East. It was a blast. Thank you for all those who watched the panel that I did with Jeff from Extra Credits, and a big thanks to Jeff for inviting me in the first place. Definitely the highlight of the show for me was meeting some of you. So thanks to everybody who took the time to find me and say hi. That was a really cool experience, and I love meeting you guys. So sorry for those that I missed. Next time I'll try and be a little more organized, and maybe we have like an official meetup or something. You know, the other highlight of the trip though for me was actually taking a self-guided walking tour of downtown Boston. And even though I don't have a video sponsor for the week, I'm going to really quickly plug this app that I found because it was so amazing and I want them to get big and be successful. So if you are someone who likes to get out and see stuff when you're in a new place, but you don't really love the whole tour guide and being in a big tour group experience, instead kind of taking things at your own pace, pausing whenever you want, taking a detour whenever you want, getting a bite to eat, and then being able to continue the tour when you're ready, and all with a really knowledgeable guide that can give great context to the stuff that they're guiding you to, and yet they just live on your phone, then please, please, please download the Walkin' Tours app. Walk-in Tours app. It's walkintours.com. I'll put a link to it in the video description. Right now, they only have self-guided tours that you can download and listen to in like a couple dozen cities in the US, but I want them to freaking explode because I have been looking for this technology for years, and I discovered them when I was in Boston for PAX East. I want them to have tours in every single city that I visit. So please check them out. Download one of their tours if you're in a city that they offer tours for, and tell your friends. Maybe I'll reach out to them and see if they actually want to be a sponsor for the show. But even if they don't, I'm plugging them anyway. It really made my time in Boston that much better. Awesome, awesome technology. Okay, let's jump in. Some people, like my friend Chris over at Treant Monk's Temple, very often, I think, look at a subclass and think, how could I shore up this character's weaknesses and make them into a character who's really pretty good or even really good at just about everything? And they take the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer and make an amazingly powerful, like, god wizard who has most of the best spells in game and is prepared for just about every situation. Let's see if I can link to Chris's Clockwork Soul Sorcerer video. And then you have people like me. When I look at a subclass, I usually think, what's the one thing that this character is best at? And how can I just amplify that one thing to the nth degree at the expense of all other facets of the character, right? In my defense, I've gotten a little better at making my characters a little more well-rounded lately, but that's kind of the exception to the rule still. And I don't know why, but it's true. I really love to make my characters as good as I can make them at one thing and shore up their weaknesses if and when I can find the time to get around to it. I make no apologies. I think it's a really fun way to build and play characters, personally. even if it might make them vulnerable at times. But also, my expectation with every single character that I create for this channel is that you will watch, maybe take some of the ideas that I present on how to stretch something to its limit, but then make it your own, filling in potential gaps as you feel necessary. So when I look at the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, what do I see? A tank. I see a character who screams protection. Protection! The tools this character is given seem to be expressly designed, in my opinion, to make them really good at keeping their allies safe and at letting them take a punch and keep on ticking. Pun intended. And so instead of thinking, we have some nice defense and protection abilities, what features can I add to that? I tend to think, what can I do to make those protection and defensive capabilities the greatest in the world at the expense of everything else? Now, I don't really think that either approach is right or the best. The best way to play a character is what's most fun for you, period. And building them this way is what tends to be the most fun for me. And I'm guessing some of you too. So it's how I like to build. And the result of trying to maximize the defensive capabilities of a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, they end up being the most durable character that I've built to date. At least so long as they have all of their resources available to them. I'll explain as we go, so let's just jump in. Episode 90, the Clockwork Sorcerer Tank. Check out this fantastic artwork by my good friend Randall Hampton, who creates fantastic pieces for the concepts that I sent him every week. I had a lot of fun meeting him, finally, in person at PAX this last weekend. He's an amazing guy and an amazing artist. I love all of the care that he puts into the small details in every single piece that he creates. If you'd like to follow Randall, maybe try and connect with him to see if you might be able to commission him for a piece for your own character or D&D group even. I will, as always, put links in the video description on how to do so. Thanks, Randall, and let's get to the build. At level 1, let me just say quickly what I basically say with every single tank build that I do on this channel, in case you're new to the channel. To be a tank, you can't just be hard to kill. The main objective of a traditional tank character is to protect your allies. And the main way you accomplish that as a tank character is by encouraging your enemies to attack you instead of your friends. That is the whole reason we care so much about our own durability, right? Because we're trying to encourage our enemies to attack us. The best way for us to encourage our enemies to attack us in D&D 5e, I think, if we're a character that's building for survivability anyway, is to put a debuff on our enemies that gives them disadvantage if they attack anyone but us. We call this kind of debuff a taunt, or maybe a soft taunt more accurately, since it doesn't really work like it does in a lot of video games where the enemy is just forced to attack you, right? Unless you're playing the Mountain Blade tank build that I did a few weeks ago. The most reliable way to pick up a soft taunt on a character is via one of 3 subclasses that get to apply this debuff on a hit. Ancestral Guardian Barbarian, Cavalier Fighter, or the Armorer Artificer. Of those 3, I think there is one very clear standout if you're planning on pairing them with a Sorcerer, and especially if you're planning on pairing them with a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, the Artificer. I mean, I might just try to find a way to take some Artificer levels with a Clockwork Soul build anyway, purely for thematic reasons, right? Come on. Clockwork, Artifice. I think thematically, it's just a match made in heaven. More than that, though, we do get a lot of nice mechanical benefits from an Artificer start, in addition to the soft taunt that it's going to give us. We get Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is great for all characters, but especially spellcasters who are going to be concentrating on spells. Going Artificer instead of Barbarian or Fighter also gives us better spell slot progression. So yes, when we first meet our hero, they are an Artificer. A character who is fascinated by clockwork creation, a talented magical tinkerer. And as for our race, I really struggled with choosing between 2 different races here, but you'll be pleased to know that I didn't even consider variant human or custom lineage. The 2 that I was really going back and forth on the one hand, Warforged seems like the obvious choice, right? They are themselves a creature created by Artifice, and they get a +1 to their armor class innately, which is fantastic for a character who values their own survivability above all. And yet, there's been a race I've been wanting to do a build around ever since Monsters of the Multiverse updates were leaked a few months back. And I think this character is the perfect one to build around this race. Any guesses? I'll wait. You're right. The Earth Genasi. Wow, this is the first time I've picked a Genasi as a race for any build on this channel, I think. Thanks, Mom! That's what we're calling monsters of the multiverse. Help me make it a thing, please. So, in case you didn't know, here are all of the details about the Earth Genasi as given us by Mom. You're a humanoid. You get to choose between medium or small size, you have 30 feet of move speed, you have dark vision, and then we get the Earth Walk feature, which lets us move across difficult terrain without any penalty if we're on the ground. Not a bad ribbon feature. And then Merge with Stone, which is the pièce de résistance. Merge with Stone says that we know the Blade Ward cantrip, okay, and we get to cast it proficiency bonus times per day as a bonus action. Excuse me? For those who don't know, Blade Ward gives you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage for a round. That's nice, but the reason it doesn't get much play in game is that it costs an action to cast. So you really give up a lot of what your character can do just to increase your survivability for a round, potentially. But if you can cast it as a bonus action, all of a sudden it becomes, I think, a much more powerful spell, especially for a character who is interested in being as durable as we are. As I've said many times on this channel, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage is most of the damage that you're going to be taking in-game. So that's really fantastic. We're going to make use of this. Also with this feature, we can cast Pass Without Trace at 5th level once per day without spending a spell slot, and then can use our spell slots afterwards to do so if we have them. Something that has become the norm for D&D content and something that I really appreciate. It's a great spell for group utility and we welcome it. As for our ability scores, I assume as always the point buy method, and this is actually another reason why I wanted to use the Mom version of the Earth Genasi. Now I'm picturing an Earth Genasi dressed like a mom. It's because they officially sanction, as of Monsters of the Multiverse, taking either a +2 to 1 ability score and +1 to a second, or a +1 to 3 ability scores. And since there aren't any half feats out there that I consider must-haves for this character, though of course there's plenty that I'd certainly like to have, I think I would want to do that and go +1 into 3 ability scores, because this character is going to be quite mad, multiple ability score dependent. And that's going to let us start with a 16 in our 3 most important ability scores. So I'd suggest starting with a 15 in Constitution and a +1 there, a 15 in Intelligence and a +1 there, and a 15 in Charisma and a +1 there. And yes, this does mean that we will be dumping our other stats. And I appreciate that 2 of those 3, Wisdom and Dexterity, tend to be pretty important saving throws for characters in 5th edition. Like I say, well-rounded isn't necessarily my thing. If you'd prefer to lower like your intelligence or charisma a bit or whatever to raise that wisdom or dexterity, go right ahead. I'll take the extreme route. Thank you very much. As for equipment, I recommend going the gold buy route, picking up scale mail, a shield, and then whatever other necessities you may have. Don't bother with weapons. Don't even look at a weapon. If you try to use a weapon with this character currently, it will probably do damage to you as opposed to your enemies. We're just going to rely on cantrips for a couple levels. As an artificer at level 1 then, we get the magical tinkering feature, which lets you turn a mundane object into a magical one that emits light or a sound or even an odor. It's a nice fun little utility feature. And then of course we get spells. There are quite a few spells that I would like to have here. For cantrips, I would say go with either Firebolt or Ray of Frost for your go-to damage. Firebolt does a smidge more damage, but Ray of Frost I think might be the better choice here, as it will also reduce enemy move speed by 10 feet, which we put to great use in our Frost Mage build last week. And oftentimes that 10 feet move speed reduction will be just enough to prevent your enemies from getting to your allies, and that's what we're here for, after all, protecting our allies. Along those lines, I would love to have Guidance as a cantrip because it lets you add a d4 to any ability check, including an initiative roll, by the way. And that would be really nice for us with our 8 dexterity. So long as you could have Guidance active when combat broke out, it does last for 1 minute. But I think Thorn Whip might be even better for us, again, especially for a protector character. With Thorn Whip, You make a melee spell attack against an enemy within 30 feet, and if you hit, you do a little damage and then pull them 10 feet towards you. Again, helping to keep your allies safe. For first level spells, I want Absorb Elements, so as your reaction you can have resistance to fire, cold, poison, thunder, lightning, acid damage. Very nice when you need it. Good for our survivability. And probably also I think I'd take Cure Wounds here. Sometimes you will fail in being a perfect protector for your allies, so it'll be nice to have something that will let you bring your fallen comrades back from the brink of death to help assuage your guilt. If only you would have tried a little harder. But I think I probably take Fairy Fire here as well. It's probably the best concentration spell we have access to for now. And hitting enemies in a 20-foot cube with a spell that gives you and your allies advantage on attacks against those enemies if they fail their saving throw is a pretty great way to help your team. At level 2, we get infusions, and that's like my favorite thing about artificers. You imbue a non-magical item and can make it magical, picking from a fantastic list of potential infusions, of which we can currently learn 4, but we can only have 2 active at any one time. I would want, I think, Enhanced Armor to give my armor or shield a +1, and right now Arcane Focus to give my spell attacks a +1 to hit, as well as let them ignore half cover. The other 2 I would learn here I think would be Enhanced Weapon, which we'll use later, and Mind Sharpener, which really helps you make your concentration checks, and you might want to consider throwing on there if that's becoming an issue for you. I wish I could have all of them active at once, but alas. And no, for those who are asking, I just don't even take the Replicate Magic item infusion and create a tattoo to give myself a spell. It might work raw, it might not. You can argue about it in the comments if you want. I personally feel pretty strongly that it's not rules as intended at the very least, so I just skip it. At level 3, we get first up the right tool for the job, lets us create some thieves or artisans tools with an hour of work for those rare times when we need a certain set of tools but don't have them. And then of course we get our artificer subclass, our artificer specialist. And as I've said, we're going armorer. So our character's fascination with magical tinkering and clockwork has led them to enhance a suit of armor of their choice to better help them in their quest to protect their allies. We get so many great things from Armorer for our purposes. First up, we get heavy armor proficiency. I hope you've been saving your money so you can get at least chainmail armor now, if not something better. We also get to choose a model for our shiny new arcane armor, the Guardian model or the Infiltrator model. We're going to focus on Guardian, of course, for this build, but you can swap out the model that you're using at the end of a short or long rest if you feel like taking the Infiltrator for a spin. And for those who often ask, I did do an Infiltrator-focused build a while back that I really enjoyed, so check that out if you're interested. But with the Guardian armor model, we get some really great features. First off, we get the Thunder Gauntlets feature, and this is the main thing we're here for, right? The armor's gauntlets count as simple melee weapons that we are proficient with, and they deal 1d8 thunder damage on a hit. We can also use our intelligence modifier for hit and damage with this weapon only. So now we can finally start making weapon attacks. Most importantly, creatures hit by the Thunder Gauntlet has disadvantage on attacks against anyone other than you until your next turn, as the armor emits a distracting magical pulse if they attempt to hurt anyone else. And thus, we have our soft taunt, and our allies rejoice with gladness. Yay! I would, at this point, swap the Arcane Focus infusion to Enhanced Weapon now to give our gauntlets a +1 to hit and damage so we can land that taunt more reliably. We also get the very nice Defensive Field feature, which lets us use a bonus action to grant ourselves temporary hit points equal to our Artificer level PBXPD. That's only 3 temporary hit points, but hey, every little bit helps, and this will be nice when we're out of our Blade Ward as a bonus action uses, or we feel pretty confident that the incoming damage is not going to be bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage this encounter. At level 4, there are, of course, really strong arguments for sticking with Artificer. We'd get an ability score increase or feat at Artificer 4, and of course, extra attack at Artificer 5 for the Armorer anyway. If you went that route, I wouldn't blame you. But the reality is, we're not building this character for damage, per se. I want extra attack more for the additional taunt it might give me than for the 1d8 +3 damage, right? And also, I promised a Sorcerer tank. I can't very well take 5 levels of Artificer to start the build and still call it a Sorcerer tank, can I? So yes, at this point in our character's career, that fascination that they have with magical tinkering and clockwork has grown into something more. I think for me, I would have like a moment in game where there was like a magical accident. We were working on our armor, perhaps, or trying to improve upon a little clockwork creation when we screwed up. We used smith tools when we should have been using gem cutter tools. Or maybe we tried uttering an incantation that our wizard friend taught us to enhance the clockwork creation, but we screwed up the incantation. Or maybe we had cast guidance on ourselves to help with our creation, but we lost concentration in the middle of it, causing things to go awry. I don't know. But as a result, some part of this clockwork creation fused or melded into our very soul. It might even have made changes to us physically. So like we've got a clockwork hand or maybe a gear sprocket sticking out of our head or something. So yes, this is totally my superhero origin story and I love it. Oh, I know. We were trying to infuse our clockwork toys with gamma rays. Nah. Whatever your reasons, we're taking Sorcerer levels now. And yes, as a Sorcerer 1, we do gain our subclass, our Sorceress origin. And of course, we're taking the Clockwork Soul. Since I have never before done a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, that's exciting. Let's read what Wizards of the Coast has to say about them. The cosmic force of order has suffused you with magic. The power arises from Mechanus, or a realm like it, a plane of existence shaped entirely by clockwork efficiency. You, or someone from your lineage, might have become entangled in the machinations of the Modrons, the orderly beings who inhabit Mechanus. Perhaps your ancestor even took part in the Great Modron March. Whatever its origin within you, the power of order can seem strange to others, but for you, it is part of a vast and glorious system. We have always appreciated the power of order. Now it's just made manifest in our soul. So first up, as a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, we get the Restore Balance feature. This is quite nice. When a creature we see within 60 feet is about to roll a d20 with advantage or disadvantage, could be for anything, an ability check, a save, an attack, it just has to be a d20 roll. Proficiency bonus times per day, we can use our reaction to prevent it. This will be nice to help keep an ally from getting hit sometimes, or helping a spell really stick to an enemy, etc. But one of the most compelling things about Clockwork Soul Sorcerers is the Clockwork Magic feature. So yes, this does let us learn some additional spells. Right now that's Alarm and Protection from Evil and Good, but more powerfully, whenever we gain a level in Sorcerer, we can replace a spell we learned with any other spell from the Wizard or Warlock spell list, so long as it's from the Transmutation or Abjuration schools. And generally speaking, the Abjuration School of Magic is the one with the best defensive and protection spells, so that's particularly great for us. So let's talk about the spells that we get at Sorcerer 1. For cantrips, there's a lot of great ones, but now that we're making weapon attacks, I'm going to say that at the very least we should get Booming Blade. We make a weapon attack as part of casting the spell, and there shouldn't be any reason why we couldn't use our Thunder Gauntlets here for this. And if the attack hits, we do a little extra thunder damage, once we hit level 5 anyway. And more importantly, if the enemy moves before our next turn, they take even more thunder damage for doing so. And this is going to be just one more way to really encourage enemies to stay close to us and not go after our friends. Plus, since we don't have extra attack, it's a nice way to help make up for the damage that extra attack would have given us. As for first level spells, we only get 2 for now, so I'm taking Shield, of course, which lets us use our reaction to raise our armor class by 5 when we're hit with an attack, and that bump to our AC lasts until our next turn. Very nice. And then swapping out this second spell for an Abjuration spell from the Warlock spell list. Yes, I want Armor of Agathis. This takes an action to cast, but lasts for an hour and doesn't require concentration. It gives us 5 temporary hit points when we cast it, and if we get hit by a melee attack, as long as we have some of those temporary hit points active, it will return 5 cold damage to the person who hit us. Really strong spell, especially for us, and I love that we can get access to it on this character. Armor of Agathis scales really well too, going up by 5 temporary hit points and damage for each spell level that we upcast it. And speaking of which, keep in mind, we do actually have second level spell slots currently, since with Artificer, when we calculate how multiclassing works for our spell slots, we take half our Artificer levels rounded up, which is unique among half-casters. With Rangers and Paladins, you round down, right? And thus, we have the spell slots currently of a level 3 full caster, right? Fantastic. At level 5, we would be a Sorcerer 2, and we get Font of Magic. We get our sorcery points. Currently, we can only use them to convert them into additional spell slots, but that's not a bad use of them at all. You get 1 per level of Sorcerer, and they reset on a long rest. And at level 6, then, we would be a Sorcerer 3, and we get second level Sorcerer spells. Now, Clockwork Soul Sorcerers automatically learn Aid, which is a fantastic defensive and support spell, not typically available to Sorcerers. It raises our current maximum hit points by 5, and then heals us 5, essentially. And since those aren't temporary hit points, it can stack nicely with Armor of Agathis or our temporary hit points that we get from Defensive Field, right? We get to cast it on up to 3 creatures, right? So it could be us and 2 others. So yes, just one more way that we are offering additional protection to our allies. I think I'd probably pick up Web here as well and start using that for my concentration instead of Fairy Fire. Web, as most of you know, is fantastic in that it can potentially restrain multiple enemies, which means we could have advantage on attacks against them, they would have disadvantage on attacks against us, and they can't move. Being restrained also gives disadvantage on dexterity saving throws as well. That's some first-rate protection that you're providing right there, plus an offensive buff if your allies can hit the targets that are stuck in Web's area of effect. We also, as Sorcerer 3, get Meta Magic, though. And Meta Magic lets us spend our sorcery points to enhance our spells in a variety of ways, and we get to pick 2 options for now. Again, I love all Meta Magic options, but for this build, I think I'd probably go with Quicken Spell and Twin Spell. Quicken Spell lets you cast a spell with a casting time of 1 action as a bonus action instead, letting you, say, throw out Web as a bonus action right at the beginning of combat and still not give up your Booming Blade attack to do damage and impose your Soft Taunt debuff, right? It would also be a nice way to use Blade Ward as a bonus action if we really needed to. Once our free uses from Earth Genasi are all used up, it could even let us cast Booming Blade as a bonus action and then Booming Blade as an action, giving us a couple of attacks in a turn, especially if we're in range of 2 enemies and want to put a soft taunt on both of them, or maybe we miss our attack when we use Booming Blade as an action and we really want to hit them, so we Quicken Spell Booming Blade as a bonus action. It just gives us a lot of nice versatility and options. Twin Spell I really love, especially in a couple of levels, but it lets you target a second creature with a spell that typically only targets 1. Lots of potential uses here for both offensive and defensive purposes, I think. Other meta magic options worth considering, I think, would be Heightened Spell to give disadvantage to 1 enemy on their first saving throw that they make against, like, your Web spell, say. It is expensive. It's 3 sorcery points to use. Careful Spell is another frontrunner, I think. You could throw out your Web in an area that might include an ally, but you really want to put it right there because it's going to get more enemies, right? And with Careful Spell, for 1 little sorcery point, your ally could automatically succeed their saving throw on that Web spell. Definitely worth considering. Don't forget also that thanks to multiclassing in Artificer, we do have 2 third-level spell slots right now for upcasting purposes, and we are going to make use of those when we crunch numbers for our level 6 damage report. For those new to the channel, this is how we calculate damage numbers against our tank builds. We pit them against 3 hypothetical combat encounters of medium difficulty for a party of 4 at this level. 1 is a boss fight against a dragon. 1 is a typical fight against 4 or 5 like normal-ish enemies that you might fight at this level. And the 3rd is just a level appropriate fireball. We figure out how much damage our tank would take if they had access to all of their resources. So like, yeah, a spell slot to cast shield if they needed it, etc. And that number is our DTPR, damage taken per round. And then we determine how long they would survive if they took that amount of damage every single round of combat, which gives us our rounds to die, or RTD. It's flawed. You're not going to have access to the shield spell every single round, but at the same time, you won't actually need to have access to the shield spell every single round because you're often not going to get hit without it. And in the real world, the imaginary real world, every enemy on the battlefield isn't going to spend their entire action attacking you and only you round after round after round, right? It's an imperfect but serviceable model so long as we apply it to every single tank character we build. Right now, with access to the shield spell, assuming we have plate armor, which we might not at level 6, but let's hope, and a shield with the enhanced defense infusion active, we have a potential AC of 26. If we upcast Armor of Agathis and Aid with our 3rd level spell slots, our current maximum hit points, including temporary hit points, is a very nice 73. Not bad for a spellcaster. But the best part is, thanks to our Earth Genasi Merge with Stone feature, we can bonus action Blade Ward, letting us take half damage on any incoming bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage that might actually find its way past our very nice AC. I know, we can only use that feature 3 times per day currently, unless we use sorcery points and quicken spell. So yes, we are talking best case scenario numbers here as always. And so, against our boss fight, which was a young white dragon at this level, our damage taken per round was all of 3, and at that rate of damage we would survive for 26 rounds. Our typical fight was 4 berserkers here, and they would do 2 damage per round to us. On average, it's actually 1.6 even, and so our rounds to die would be 46. And then a 3rd level DC 14 fireball would do 12 damage to us on average, assuming that we have the reaction and the spell slot for absorb elements. And at that rate of damage, we would survive for 7 rounds. So that's like way better than any other tank build that I've done to date for attacks against our armor class at this level, and even better than most for the fireball. Now, I appreciate that it's also pretty resource intensive, and you're not always going to know when you're going to need to use that Blade Ward as a bonus action, right? And you have limited uses of it and of your shield spell. But still, the potential durability of this character is sort of mind-boggling, even at early levels, at least in short stints. Let's see where we can take it from here. At level 7, we get our first ability score increase, or feat, and it's kind of a tough call for me, actually. I want more Constitution to give me more hit points and better saves. I want a better Charisma score to help my Sorcerer spells stick more reliably. I want a better Intelligence score to help my soft taunt attacks land with greater regularity. I'd love to have Resilient Dexterity and Resilient Wisdom to help with my saving throws. At the end of the day, though, I'm crunching numbers for survivability, so for our purposes, I'm going to take the tough feat here to give us an additional 2 hit points per character level, which is especially nice for our little D6 self. You go a different route if you want. I mean, heck, I can even see you dipping 1 level of Hexblade here so that your Thunder Gauntlet attack could be made with Charisma. It would certainly make us a little less mad. And also, how weird and cool would that be? You made this armor, and now it's like the physical manifestation of an otherworldly being that has become your patron and wants to give you additional power. That's kind of creepy, and a story I would like to hear. Thank you very much. At level 8, we would be a Sorcerer 5, and we get 3rd level Sorcerer spells. Some of the best spells ever for damage and control are 3rd level spells, but I'm going to highlight 2. Counterspell is probably the very best way in-game you can protect yourself and your allies from enemy spellcasters, since it lets you, with your reaction, just negate a spell that an enemy is trying to cast, right? Your low saving throws aren't going to matter that much if the spell just never goes off in the first place. With Counterspell, if it's a 3rd level spell or lower when you cast it, that spell is just automatically negated. If it's higher than 3rd level, or I should say if it's higher than the level at which you are casting Counterspell, you have to roll to see if you succeed. Using your spellcasting ability, the DC is 10 plus the spell's level. So for a 4th level spell, if you were trying to counter it, the DC would be 14 to see if you succeed. It kind of stinks that our charisma isn't super high for these purposes, but one nice thing about being a sorcerer is that thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we now have at this level, Sorcerer 5, magical guidance, which tells us that if we make an ability check and fail, you can spend 1 little sorcery point to re-roll that d20. and must use the new roll. This counterspell check is an ability check, so that's pretty amazing. So yeah, counterspell will truly be one of the best ways to protect your party in-game. The other one that I'm going to mention here is haste. Now, since haste requires our concentration, your party truly might be better off if you just stick to web. Or, now that we're getting 3rd level spells, fear, or hypnotic pattern, or slow. What makes haste so great though, especially for us, is that it not only doubles your move speed, but it increases your armor class by 2, a welcome boon, and gives us 1 additional action per turn that we can use, among other things, to make a single weapon attack. This is one of the reasons why I didn't feel too bad about passing on extra attack, because I knew haste was coming. And the great thing is, it doesn't conflict with Booming Blade. With haste up, we could cast Booming Blade as an action, and then make a single weapon attack against a second target, ideally, I think, to impose that soft taunt on 2 different enemies, or just give us a second chance to land it on the same enemy, or do more damage to them. Now, my favorite thing about haste for this build is that, because we're a sorcerer, we can twin haste and cast it on an ally as well, and man, that is powerful. One of the best buffs in game for a weapon using ally, and giving them a +2 to their armor class, doubling their move speed, giving them advantage on dexterity saving throws, just really makes us that much better of a protector. Now, of course, there is a big potential downside to haste, and that is that when the spell ends, whether because your minute is up or because you drop concentration, you have to spend an entire round doing basically nothing, as a wave of exhaustion sweeps over you. Double whammy if you twinned that on an ally, right? I'm sorry about that. But I'm not afraid. I like the potential danger. I think it makes the spell that much more interesting to use in-game, and could lead to some fun and potentially very memorable moments. I say go for it. Also, of course, with every level that we gain additional spell levels, don't forget to take a look at the Abjuration and Transmutation, Warlock and Wizard spells, not typically available to sorcerers, but available to Clockwork Soul sorcerers, right? Tiny Servant would be a good example of one to consider at this level, I think. And don't forget, we do have 4th level spell slots now for upcasting purposes. But level 9 is where we get my favorite feature for this particular character, because we'd be a Sorcerer 6, and as a Clockwork Soul sorcerer, we get Bastion of Law. I love this feature for this character, but it's not cheap. With Bastion of Law, as an action, you can spend 1 to 5 sorcery points. We only have 6, and twinning haste would cost 3, right? Now, granted, you could burn spell slots to replenish your sorcery points, but still expensive. Anyway, for every sorcery point you spend, you can create a magical barrier around yourself or an ally within 30 feet. It doesn't require concentration, and it lasts until you use this feature again or take a long rest, so it lasts all day. The warded creature gains a number of d8s equal to sorcery points spent, and when they take damage, they can spend a number of those d8s, roll them, and then the ward absorbs that many hit points of damage. Is this the most powerful feature ever? No. I bet some might even claim that it's kind of bad or not a particularly good use of our sorcery points. They might be right. I love it anyway. It's pretty unique. It's perfectly on point for what we're trying to do with this character, and when I crunch numbers, I'm going to assume, in the interest of exploring the possible, that we're using 5 of them on ourselves. You probably shouldn't. If you use them at all, you should probably use them on a squishier ally. But let's do it anyway, just for fun. So yes, for our level 9 damage report then, I'm going to assume that we have haste active on ourselves, bringing our potential AC up to a 28, and also assume that we spent 5 of our very precious sorcery points to give ourselves a magical ward that will absorb 5d8 damage, or 23 on average, rounded up. If we're casting Armor of Agathis and Aid with our 2 4th level spell slots that we'd have right now, we would be sitting at a potential total hit points of 145, including temporaries and ward. That's more than double since last time. Wow. I am still assuming that we've got Blade Ward active as well. I know I'm making a lot of assumptions, I'm using a lot of resources, but in that best case scenario, against our boss here, which would be a young blue dragon, our DTPR would be 3 again, and at that rate of damage, we would survive for 48 rounds. The typical fight was against 4 hobgoblin captains, They would also do 3, though because of rounding and fractions, our rounds to die here would be 46. And against a DC 15 level 5 fireball, we would take 15 damage, and at that rate we'd survive for 10 rounds. So compared to other tank builds at this level, we're in the exact same place. Better than anything for attacks against our AC, and better than most for that fireball. And I mean, the truth is we could be taking 0 damage per round from fireball and survive for infinity rounds at that rate of damage thanks to counterspell, right? That said, our durability is even more resource intensive right now, potentially using up sorcery points in addition to our spell slots and our limited blade ward as a bonus action PBXPD. So in reality, you're unlikely to be this durable every single round, right? Especially if you had a lot of combat encounters per day. But again, you're also unlikely to be attacked by every single enemy every single round as well. So I would 100% expect some really consistent, super high level durability from this character, as well as plenty of control, buffing, debuffing, and protection options. At level 10, part of me really wants to go back to Artificer for a minute now to pick up an ability score increase, which we could really use, and then extra attack, which would give us more chances to hit our target for that soft taunt application, or potentially hit a third target if we're hasted, right, and within range of 3 targets. That said, between the haste spell and the really nice damage that we're getting from Booming Blade, and that's about to scale again, just next level, right? Not to mention the way that Booming Blade really encourages enemies to stay near us, I think I would probably just stick with Sorcerer, honestly. Our survivability at this point is hugely bolstered by our spell slots and our sorcery points, and so I want more of them. And of course, those high-level sorcerer spells are super powerful. Most importantly, for me, staying with Sorcerer lets us get to Sorcerer 14 by the end of this build, and I really wanted to get there on a Clockwork Soul build. So let's just stay the course, shall we? As a Sorcerer 7, then we'd get 4th level Sorcerer spells, Dimension Door, Polymorph, Wall of Fire, Greater Invisibility, Blight, Banishment, lots of amazing ones. Nothing I'm going to use to improve our durability, so pick your favorites, but use them. Even instead of haste for your concentration, if your party will be better off with it. Don't forget to take a look at transmutation and abjuration spells not typically available to sorcerers, like Fabricate, Private Sanctum, Stone Shape, etc. And we do now have 5th level spell slots as well. Keep that in mind. At level 11, we'd be a Sorcerer 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. Again, you might prefer bumping Intelligence to hit more reliably, or Charisma for your Sorcerer spells, but since I'm crunching numbers for survivability, I'm going to take a bump to our Constitution, giving us an 18 Constitution. Now, you do what you think best. At level 12, we'd be a Sorcerer 9, and we get 5th level spells. Animate objects, dominate person, hold monster, synaptic static is amazing. Telekinesis is great, Wall of Stone is really useful. But arguably, the best 2 spells we could get at this level, we get for free as a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. Greater Restoration, which is huge for removing a lot of debilitating statuses and effects, and Wall of Force, which is one of the best control spells in game and isn't available to sorcerers typically. Clockwork Souls truly have access to some of the very best spells in game, no question. And yes, again, sometimes your party might be best served by you and an ally having haste on you, but I bet more often they would be better served by you trapping multiple enemies behind an invisible wall of force while your party takes out their friends, right? So even though I am assuming when we crunch numbers that I'm using haste because it makes our armor class better, please don't feel like I'm saying that this is what you should be doing with your concentration all the time, okay? We do have 6th level spell slots now for upcasting. At level 13, we would be a Sorcerer 10, and we get a 3rd metamagic option. Assuming that you took Quicken Spell and Twin Spell previously, I think I would go with Careful Spell here to just help keep your friends safe if and when you throw out those area of effect, damage, or control spells. So for our level 13 damage report, not a lot has changed tactically for us as to what we'd be doing if we wanted to maximize our durability. I'm still assuming that we're using sorcery points to give ourselves a ward, that we are upcasting Armor of Agathis to the 6th level potentially, which sounds crazy, I know, but 30 temporary hit points that returns 30 damage to a melee attacker really might be worth it sometimes, especially considering that those temporary hit points will have a pretty good chance of surviving for at least 1 or 2 attacks. That's a lot of potential damage returned. And yeah, assuming that we upcast Aid at the 5th level to give 3 party members, including us here, 20 additional hit points, that might be worth it as well, especially for your ally's sake. Our armor class is still a potential max of 28, assuming the shield spell, and our potential maximum hit points, including temporary hit points and our ward, would now be 209. We broke the bicentennial barrier. Yikes. And thus, against our boss fight here, which was an adult white dragon, our damage taken per round would be 5 on average, and at that rate, we would survive for 39 rounds. The typical fight was against 5 helmed horrors, and they would do 3 DTPR, and our RTD would be 65 at that rate. And against a level 7 DC 16 fireball, we'd take 19 damage on average and survive for 12 rounds at that rate. Okay, so the numbers are getting fairly silly and meaningless at this point, right? Who's going to be in combat for 65 rounds? But again, who's going to have all of the resources available for 65 rounds? Nobody, right? I suppose that we can just rest assured that we are very, very hard to kill. And also that we should probably be, putting the Bastion of Law ward on an ally instead of on ourselves, of course. And maybe using a lower level spell slot for Armor of Agathis, etc. But still, it's fun to see how high we can pump that survivability, right? And then make decisions ourselves on when and how to scale back, and also, of course, keeping in mind that we're not always going to have all of our resources available to us. At level 14, we would be a Sorcerer 11, and we get 6th level Sorcerer spells. So, Chain Lightning. Disintegrate. Better yet, Mass Suggestion. The one spell that I'm going to say we really want here for tanking purposes is Fizban's Platinum Shield. And yes, I'm going to assume that we're using it now instead of haste for our concentration, and it is amazing. With it, you target one creature, meaning that if you wanted to spend 6 sorcery points, you could potentially target 2 creatures with this, thanks to Twin Spell. And that's pretty amazing, because a creature affected by Fizban's Platinum Shield is surrounded by a field of silvery light that provides half cover. So that means a +2 to our armor class unless the enemy can ignore cover. It gives resistance to elemental damage, meaning no more trying to guess if you should save your reaction in spell slots for absorb elements. And amazingly, it also gives evasion, meaning that if you needed to make a dexterity save or take half damage on something, like a fireball, you take no damage if you succeed and only half if you fail. And for us, who will be failing any and all dexterity saving throws that we failed to counterspell anyway, those benefits could stack. So you'd take half damage on a failed save against that fireball and then half again for having resistance to fire damage, right? You can even move this field to another creature as a bonus action on your turn. Such a fantastic spell. I'm so happy that we have it. Admittedly, using this instead of haste would mean we go back to only a single attack per turn unless we can quicken Booming Blade. So it's not necessarily a no-brainer to just use this all of the time for our concentration, but I am going to assume that we're using it going forward when I crunch numbers. And yeah, consider twinning it if you have the sorcery points to spare. We do have 7th level spell slots as well now, too, so don't forget. At level 15, we would be a Sorcerer 12. We get another ability score increase or feat. I'm going to max our Constitution and cap it now at 20 for number crunching purposes, but you very well may decide to put those points into Intelligence to more reliably hit, or Charisma to raise your spell attack and save DC for your Sorcerer spells, and I wouldn't blame you in either case. Or, yeah, maybe take Resilient Wisdom to keep yourself from getting mind controlled. All valid options. At level 16, we would be a Sorcerer 13. We get 7th level spells. I'm going to say pick your favorite. Draconic Transformation is fun. Firestorm, Reverse Gravity is a favorite, but nothing that I would plan on using to bolster our survivability necessary, so PYF. We do have 8th level spell slots now as well. And then finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Sorcerer 14, and I was really happy that we made it to Sorcerer 14 here because we get such a cool and powerful ability that I would hate to have missed out on. As a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, we now get Trance of Order, which tells us that once per day, or by spending 5 sorcery points, as a bonus action, we can align our consciousness to the endless calculations of Mechanus. Thereafter, for 1 minute, Attack rolls against us cannot benefit from advantage, and whenever we make an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, we can treat anything rolled that's lower than a 10 as a 10. That's kind of amazing. And the fact that we could potentially use this feature more than once per day with sorcery points is double amazing. Granted, it would be really hard to spend sorcery points for this, and for our ward, and to twin Fizban's Platinum Shield, without converting sorcery points to spell slots at least. And even then, that's a ton of resources. But I love that we have the option if we want. Now, this isn't going to do a ton for our survivability actually, other than bolstering our saving throws of course, but with our low dexterity and wisdom saving throw modifier, even if thanks to this feature we can't roll lower than a 10, we're still likely to fail. Unless we're standing right next to a paladin or something, right? But we'll almost never fail a constitution or concentration check now. And our Thundering Gauntlet attacks will be that much more reliable too. Not to mention our counterspell checks. It's just a really cool, fun, and fairly unique ability, and I love having it. For our final damage report then. Our armor class is in the same place. We've gained evasion for those pesky dex-based saves thanks to Fizban's Platinum Shield. And if we upcast Armor of Agathis to an 8th level and aid to a 7th, or vice versa for that matter, if we include our ward, our potential maximum hit points are 263 on average. And so against our boss here, which was an adult red dragon, our damage taken per round would be 11, and at that rate, we would survive for 25 rounds before dying. Our typical fight was against 5 earth elementals, and our DTPR was 6, and our RTD was 46. And against even the mighty Meteor Swarm, on average, we would take 44 damage from Meteor Swarm, and at that rate, we would survive for 6 rounds. And again, compared to other tanks, we're in the same place. Off the charts versus bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage against our AC, and better than most versus Meteor Swarm. And so, what are my final thoughts on this build? This build was so much fun to create, and also really weird. A sorcerer who never increases their charisma score. It means a lot of the things that you would typically be doing with a sorcerer that would really benefit from a higher charisma just wouldn't work quite as well with this character. So yeah, I would definitely be emphasizing spells here that just work without a saving throw or requiring an attack roll, right? And that's why Haste, Wall of Force, Fizban's Platinum Shield, Aid, Armor of Agathis, etc. are all so good. Then again, considering how great at least our potential survivability is, you might have wanted to forego bumping Constitution or even taking the tough feat so you could bump your charisma instead, right? And have that option to also be a little bit more of a traditional spellcaster, sorcerer, controller / blaster, right? But man, our survivability. I think especially if you played this character at a table that functions a lot like mine, actually, where we typically only have 1 or 2 really tough combat encounters per long rest, this character would be particularly amazing. I have a hard time imagining them ever dying in that case, unless the rest of your party gets wiped. I mean, especially if we were using all of our resources selfishly, but of course, you probably shouldn't be using all of your resources selfishly because you don't need this much survivability. It's fun to theorycraft about, no question, but don't lose sight of the fact that your tankiness is there to serve the greater purpose of protecting your allies and keeping them safe, right? And you are a sorcerer who is capable of doing the most amazing job of protecting those allies, and I love it madly. Almost as much as I love you, because yes, that's the build for the week, and I love you. Thank you so much for watching, for being here, for liking and commenting and subscribing. I hope you'll check out the rest of the content in the channel if you're not in the habit of doing so, but more importantly, I hope that you stay safe and that you're happy and good and kind, and that I see you again really, really soon. So until then, take care. Bye. Commander Shepard reporting for duty. I'm wide awake, wide awake. I'm not sleeping. to tell you the right way or the best play. Well, don't even say that. The Clockwork Soul. The Clockwork... Yeah, how do I want to say that? Let's jump in. I keep saying that. Stop saying that. Let's just confirm that. Actually, don't even say that. Come on. To help assuage. Better look it up. Bless me.